Welcome, everyone. My name is Maylene Hamto, and I am an avid reader and reviewer of my book blog, Colors of Influence. And I also review books for outlets and platforms such as City Books, Halo Halo Review, Book Sirens, Readsy, and the Nonfiction Authors Association. So, Book Talks focuses on fiction and nonfiction works that highlight issues of diverse identities, equity and inclusion, indigenous ways of being, and decolonial approaches to the struggle for liberation. I talk to authors whose works contribute to a nuanced understanding of various cross cultural contexts of our shared humanity and common dreams. So, the work featured in this web series reveal essential truths about the author's unique perspectives. And today I am honored to have Lynn Rasmussen, founder of the Maui Institute and author of Seeing, a field guide to the patterns and processes of nature, culture, and consciousness. So, Lynn is a systems theorist and researcher with over 25 years of conversations and collaborations with cutting edge systems scientists and thinkers, and also with roots in public health and community service. She applies her knowledge of systems to the environmental, cultural, and economic crises facing her island home of Hawaii. And in the book Seeing, she distills the work of hundreds of scientists, theorists, and systems thinkers down to the essentials of system science. Um, System science, also called complexity science, describes how everything from an atom to a brain to the universe is made up of the same patterns. According to Lynn, for 14 billion years, nature systems have organized themselves using networks, boundaries, bonds, flows, feedbacks, cycles, evolution, and more. And so, Seeing is a reference book, much like a field guide to birds. The first chapter provides a brief overview of the emerging science of systems and also describes the limitations of the English language for expressing this worldview. And over the next 19 chapters of the book, she uses more than 150 images, graphics, and tables to describe and illustrate systems processes, which are networks, feedback, cycle, hierarchy, flows, evolution, using definitions from the literature, the field guides definition, what they're also called in the different sciences and in life. Also shares lots of examples from nature, from human life and technology, as well as features and functions. And I had the wonderful opportunity to review Seeing, a field guide on Read See Discovery, which you can read by visiting the link in the description of this YouTube channel. And I also wanted to briefly share a couple of excerpts from other reviewers. So, according to Gary Smith, who is the 24-25 president of the International Society for the System Sciences, says, this book is going to be one of those that changes the way you see literally everything. And for Tyler Vogt, PhD, author of Meta Patterns and Quarks to Culture, he says Seeing has forged a new and needed niche in the ecosystem of books for the general public about systems thinking, theory, and practice. So, welcome, Lynn. Thank you for being part of this book blog series. Thanks for joining Book Talks.
Thanks, Maylene. I'm so happy to be here.
Absolutely. It was such a pleasure reading your book. And, I was a little bit intimidated at first because I had, very little exposure to system science when I picked it up. But I was curious and you piqued my interest definitely with the blurb. But you can tell us a little bit about the Maui Institute first, if you can share what is the purpose and vision for the think tank.
I've owned the URL for over 20 years. As soon as you could get URLs, I nailed that down. But it wasn't until last year that my friend and I, Laura Civitello and I, put it together. So it really is a startup. And our first project was publishing this book. I had opportunities to publish with publishers, but I have a clear audience. And when you have a clear audience, it's really kind of good to do it yourself these days. And so that was our first project. But the vision and the mission, we've left it very open. It's essentially to apply systems science and systems thinking to our ideas, our observations, and our actions on the island. And because we're so accustomed to thinking in terms of our industrial colonialist thinking that we need a different way to think. And the Hawaiian culture definitely enriches that point of view. And this science gives us, we actually have a science to back the Hawaiian point of view, the indigenous perspective, which is very exciting. So that, and it also the deep ecological, the deep environmental views. It really brings together the folks that are doing anti-colonial or I like to say recolonization of the islands in a different way, because I'm definitely the white colonist, I mean, and living in the white colonist doctor's house built for the plantation, is there. But it's clear that the way that we've been running these islands, the way that we've been running our societies in the islands is not sustainable and not appropriate, and needs massive change. So our purpose is really to start conversations, not to even lecture or teach, but to kind of more listen and contribute. Mhm.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for that work. And I have, more questions later on regarding sort of how you brought in the indigenous worldview. But thought maybe for this conversation, we can start guiding our listeners first through the book and the purpose of it and how you structured it. And so you have consistently referred to Len Troncali, I believe is how it's pronounced, systems processes theory as very central to your approach. So can you briefly describe what that is?
Sure. Systems processes theory says that every system, which is everything that you see, is made up of the same systems processes, the same patterns of interactivity. Everything in existence consists of everything is organizing to emerge as wholes. Everything is networked. We're all within networks and part of networks, and we are networks, and our networks are made up of networks. I mean, which is a hierarchy of systems, subsystems. We have boundaries. And we evolve through time. Len identified these processes, these systems processes, these patterns of interactivity in each of the sciences. So he showed that it's a science, it's a meta science. And in each of those sciences, and maybe a science wouldn't have a pattern, and that would be a source of hypotheses for that science. But each science would have these processes. They'd call them different things with different names. And so he spent decades combing through weeks. Every week, he would comb through Nature and Science, the journals, and underline patterns that he would see and make notes, tear out the pages and throw them in boxes. And over time, he developed about 100 systems processes, and then he kind of narrowed them down to about 54 by lumping them together a bit. And then I only cover 19 in my book because they're the ones I use. I thought I'd cover 10, but I use about 19 of them. So
Yeah, and thank you for sharing. So this has been around for a while. I think you mentioned, go ahead.
yeah, it's been okay. Len started outlining this in the 1970s, and then by the 1990s, he had it completely he had a science outlined, and he had listed all these systems processes. But he called them candidate systems processes. He felt they needed to be really, really, each one needed to be uh, further identified and outlined and investigated, and all those different sciences. It had to be shown that they were in each. And by in each science, that means in each level of existence. Remember, sciences are covering different scales of things, spatial scales and time scales. So you might be looking at atoms or molecules or cells or tissues or stars, or so the different sciences tell you different scales of beings, different types of systems. He was about, I thought when I discovered him in 1999 and 2000, I thought, oh, he's been 25 years ahead of his time. He's 50 years ahead of his time now. Complexity science and systems processes aren't even recognized or given a name. They're called all these different things. They could be called attributes or concepts or something, but they can be clearly modeled, and we recognize them, and they're now, and they're in our lexicon, where networks were not. In 2000 they were webs, and in 2000 we didn't have an understanding. Now we're all networking.
Yeah, great point. Yeah. And so in your book, you write that system science is universal, and it has applications for culture, ethics, psychology, sociology, economics, and spirituality. Really, everything that makes us all human life human, right? So can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, if you a regular science asks, like, or a discipline like psychology asks particular questions of their particular system, right? With their particular jargon, and they use particular ways of measuring, and each within different sciences. And that's kind of an industrial worldview, by the way. It's break things down into parts so that you can understand them and then fix them when they're broken. No matter what I'm talking about, I ask the same questions. What are the boundaries? Is it made up of networks? Is it part of networks? What are the flows? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? And then I get an entirely different view of the system. I can define things like love. I mean, let me give an example. You can see love as flows of, okay, you can see love as flows of information, material, and energy between people. And you have to be open to have that feeling. And love opens you. And that exchange creates the bonds that are the links and networks that assure that our societies succeed, because we have to have flows of information, material, and energy between us and within our family and within our communities to even exist, because we're all networks and made up of networks. So love is that bonding that forms the links and networks and forms a system of marriage. Love is also a feedback loop. It's the feeling, it's this evolutionary gift that we have been given that feels good when we do the right thing. And the right thing is to bond with each other and to exchange information and material and energy so that we better survive and we care for each other. So you begin to see something as seemingly vague and hard to nail down as love in very simple ways. And you begin to say, hey, I need to be open to be able to love, I need to be exchanging, and then that feeling comes. It becomes very simple and clear. That's just one small example of from an industrial view, love is very confusing. It's not emotions aren't trustworthy. From this view, an emotion would be an indicator of my level of consciousness.
Wow. Yeah, well, thank you for breaking that down for us, and using that example of something that, maybe seemingly we might think not can be explained by by something like system science, but you did that so well, and thank you for sharing. And now, because of that example that you gave, I was also curious about, how has living in Hawaii influenced or evolved your thinking about the implications of systems processes? And you introduced this a little bit in your when we started chatting earlier about the Maui Institute, but wanting to see if yeah, anything else you'd like to elaborate on.
Well, 45 years ago when we moved back to Hawaii, we went to school and came back here, and I had a job as a public health nurse. And so, as a public health nurse, you go to people's homes and you see a wide range of people, types of people, kinds of homes. I was on, I was privileged to get to go to plantation workers' homes and rich people's homes and poor people's homes. And we have a lot of different cultures here. And then I was nurse for Head Start for a while from Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. And then when my children started school, I was helping at public school, and I saw that the systems that we have in place for school weren't working for way too many children, particularly children of color, children from other cultures. It's definitely an industrial system, and that worked pretty well when it didn't matter if you passed or failed in school, because you could always get a great job. But by the 80s, no, it wasn't working for far too many people. No child was to be left behind, and suddenly children were behind when they were 6. And before that, that just didn't happen. It just wasn't considered important. I saw that happening. I started co-founded a youth center because I saw too many unhappy children going home. Their parents were working 2 jobs. Too many kids were alone. And then saw that our way of doing the youth center wasn't quite working as well as we'd like. And I had started graduate school, and I ran into systems thinking. I ran into the systems thing, applied it to the youth center, and bang, it took off. So from then, I didn't realize at the time that people didn't apply this theoretically all that much at the time, but wow, it worked for me. So I kept using it in different kinds of ways. And then living here, I've become more and more over the decades conscious and interested in and reading and listening and attending events about Hawaiian culture and the importance of the Hawaiian point of view, perspective, worldview for our islands, and then how systemically they think, and the contrast between the established political scene and how nature works and how their cultures work is profoundly important. So this island is the perfect laboratory for this work. And that's how I see it. But I'm just getting started, really. I'm coming out of the closet in some ways locally. I've done a lot of different kinds of things. I've been on the board of the local homeless shelter center. Half of it burned down last year in the fires, or in 2023 in the fires in Lahaina. Our island is under duress, and the housing crisis turned into a housing apocalypse, and we're in danger of more fires, and Hawaii has never had fires before. It's environmental degradation is causing it. So there's lots and lots of work being done here, and lots of people doing very interesting things. And at the foundation of their thinking is system science, is systems thinking, the ones that are really doing the great work. And I think I can help with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really appreciated how you highlighted the indigenous worldview into the text, and how that really shone through. And yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about that, how you made the decision to explicitly incorporate that into your discussions.
My friend Dwayne Hyberson, he's in his 80s, and he's a systems engineer and long time. He loves physics, and I'm in conversations with him weekly with a group, small group, and he's outlining a different way of looking at science, a simplified working way. And I have it in the first chapter of my book. And he says, basically science is the observation of regularities, the modeling of those regularities, and then the theories about those regularities, the story around those models and those regularities. And I say in my book, and I see this all the time, is that the Hawaiians were very good at observing regularities, very good, of the natural world, and then their relationships with the natural world. And they modeled them. They told in chants and stories. They communicated everything from navigation with the stars to how water flows through the Aina, through the land. They have the language is massively metaphorical and deep. And just aloha alone is a profound word. It's not just hi there and bye. It's ha is the breath, and it's energy, and it's the ha is runs through all things. And alo is the sharing, and aloha is the sharing of the breath. But it's aloha is actually what binds and holds everything together. So it's a big world. It has deeper meanings. The more you read about aloha and ha, the more you understand it, the deeper the implications have for life and everything else. So this, as I read more and I learn more, I just see the deep understanding of the interconnections, these modelings that they're doing, and these stories around it it's science. And it's interesting because listening to Indigenous speakers, it was just last week listening to one who just said, hey, disregard all these scientists coming in from the mainland. First, listen to your own science first, because this is grounded here in this land now. The fire experts might know something out there, but we know this land, and in much more depth of understanding. So, and it's definitely science. It can't be disregarded. So that's my feeling about that at this point.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you, Lynn. And we're getting to the part of the interview where I would be asking you to share an excerpt, and I would just want to say that this is one of my favorite parts of interviewing, just because I get to hear the author, say out or identify the part of the book that really captures, key point that they want to understand. And so I'll invite you to do that. And I would just ask you, before you start reading the excerpts, if you could give us a little bit of background about why you chose that particular excerpt.
I'm just going to read the last 2 pages. And the reason why is because I think it says what's important about the book and sums it up. I think I've said enough. Look, I'm describing, it sounds so simple to me. But what I've described is not just systems thinking, like this is a system here, and it means and systems thinking it means it's related to other systems, and it's interconnected, and a few things like that. I'm actually asking people to look at systems of systems. And that's a shift. And so it's hard to pick a place in the book that, it's because it's logically building throughout the whole book. But I'm going to give it a shot to read the last 2 pages. How's that? So because the last 2 pages are kind of my favorite. So, okay, so here we go. Today, people everywhere are frustrated and discouraged by being dependent on powerful, destructive global systems. The problems of new technologies and our existing politics and economics are ethical problems. We have the algorithms for growth and profit, but not for care and ethics, for regulating power, reversing environmental and social destruction, identifying misinformation and disinformation, or propagating what will help us thrive. Social, governmental, and technological systems are poorly designed, and we all pay the price. The new meta-science of system science can facilitate the shift in human consciousness required for our survival. System science offers a framework for seeing ourselves more clearly, tools for comparing beliefs and theories, tools for describing what is otherwise indescribable, assessment tools and design tools, and an evolutionary guidance system. When we organize in the way that nature does, then we behave ethically. Our networks distribute to all nodes. Our hierarchies assure better communication and distribution of labor. We cooperate to regenerate the systems that maintain us. All of this organizing involves seeking, processing information, and growing knowledge in order to get more energy for the work of further organizing. Then nature runs a test. Can the system hold up? Does it fight off entropy and succeed in its environment, or does it fail to thrive? Humans are not the accidental outcome of random genetic errors. We are manifestations of the universal propensity toward increasing complexity. We emerge from and produce ever more complex systems of systems processes. People have described nature's regularities for tens of thousands of years. Our actions affect the world, and these changes feed back to inform us. Any action, even one that appears to be the most ethical, can have enormous unintended effects, the result of amplifying feedback loops and the processes of chaos theory, which is the essence of Hinduism's concept of karma. The best we can do is keep learning. Through fits and starts, we are learning the hard way. We're beginning to figure out what our ancestors understood. Evolution is a learning process. Nature is our teacher, and if we do not learn fast enough, we will fail the test. It's kind of heavy,
It's heavy and so needed, right?
but it's kind of hopeful too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I have a follow-up to that, because I feel like this book has, you wrote it during a time when we really needed to understand how system science can help us, right? We have the confluence of the climate crisis, of course, what's going on with late stage capitalism, racial inequities just continue to perpetuate, all of the ills of society. And so I know you've addressed this before, but if I could just ask Lynn, how can system science help us, better understand how to solve our most complex, pressing issues as the human species?
I think, we're all beginning to think systemically anyway. The it's 25 years into the century, it's clear that the lexicon has changed. The influences of Indigenous people, of justice, of moving toward justice, the collapse of the capitalist systems are coming. What we're seeing, this we can, as you start to see things in terms of systems and systems processes, you're just at home in the universe. You just go, oh, okay, that's happening. You just go, oh, yeah, that again. I mean, I was reading Genesis, the book of Genesis, and I'm not a biblical person. I mean, live in the middle of the Pacific. That's not, I'm as Buddhist as I am Christian here, and now Hawaiian. So it's in my thinking, but it does describe how prophets come along about every 200 years in cultures. And what we do know now is that empires last about 250 years, and we're on the end of that life cycle. And then a life cycle is a systems process. And it's been, and the life cycles of of um, of these systems have been well described. And at the end, there's decadence, and nothing works for the people, and the rich get richer, and everything falls apart. It starts with pioneers, and obviously it starts with pioneers pioneering through somebody else's land, and it ends with destruction of the land because of extraction and exploitation. The Tower of Babel falls apart, and everybody spreads out, and all the languages come back again. It's, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the languages coming back again, people going back to the land, people being aware that this is not going to help us anymore. It's falling apart. Now it's kind of global. So I think you can just go, okay, this is what's happening now. What do I do? And you can say, okay, I'm looking at the systems that, say, the governmental systems now that we have locally, and what works and what doesn't, and why doesn't it work? And what we call democracy, there are other kinds of democracies that work better. We don't have to have what we have. Our elections and voting actually divide us. And there are other ways to do it. There are other ways to get together when you have a county council meeting and you have a vote. I mean, half the people like it, half the people don't. You pass it. That means half of it's junk. You're passing poor design. It means we haven't gone through the process of design to make everybody go, this is good enough. And then we pass terrible stuff, and then we wonder why we have problems. It's because we have this efficient industrial view of democracy that actually I don't think our founders had. It was pre-industrial, remember? So now we're being efficient, and we're being, and it's messing us up. So, but people are starting to see this, and we're using different kinds of systems, and definitely thinking more in collaboration, and considering different ways to do things. So, and it has to happen at the local level, because remember, if you think about a fractal seed, we're all operating with the same system in our communities, and in our cities, our states, and our nation are all working on the same system. But if we started a simpler system here, where it's a better design system, that's a great little thing, and we start it locally, that could become a seed that seeded everything, you know. And it could grow very fast. So there's lots of ways to apply it. This kind of thinking. Also, the assumption that things are entrenched and that they're hard to change, and that it's expensive and takes a lot of time and a lot of people and a lot of energy. That's an industrial illusion too. Change happens very quickly if it's the right change. If it can move very quickly. And it's just not right yet. So it's a much more functional view for running human systems, or thinking in terms of human systems and natural systems, and for seeing ourselves as natural systems and not separate. If that makes sense. Did I answer that question?
Yes, you did. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, definitely not separate from nature, as you mentioned. You've seen a lot and learned a lot from, being part of the Hawaiian community there, and how the indigenous people really look to nature to kind of construct, their ways of living and being, and all that. And so I appreciate the sort of the humility that you kind of embodied in this text, and also in the system science that you were putting forth. and in inviting us all to, you know, see the wisdom in that. I was curious. You mentioned earlier that this the time is right. There's we have the vocabulary, more understanding about networks. We are networked, right? We are networking. That language is now part of the lexicon. But I was wondering if you could identify, or what were the most challenging parts of writing the book?
Ah, I started writing it. I thought, oh, I can write this thing in 6 months in 2019. Um, because, I'd been studying this thing and writing stuff up and working on it, giving workshops for 20 years. And then I started writing it, and of course, it was bigger than that, more than that. And then by the time COVID hit, um, and even before COVID hit, I thought, I'm not writing it for this audience. The audience I was first writing it for were professor types who wanted it they needed a primer. There was no up-to-date primer on system science. And they felt I had I'm not actually a scientist. I'm more of a science teacher, pulling this out. But in doing this, I had to also because I was putting a lot together, I had to actually become a systems theorist actually too. And I think so I had to, a couple of years into it, I changed my audience. And it became way more important for me to write it for my island than it was to write it for uh, my friend at Cornell. It was like, or my friend over at MIT, or my friend at, that's really great, but that's not the audience that really would appreciate this or need it as well. They'd appreciate it, but not as much. Also, I realized there's no room for it. It doesn't fit in any curriculum. I was giving a talk in Ithaca at Cornell in November, and um, it was really well received. And Al George, who started the systems engineering and systems program there, said to me, he's in his 80s now, said to me, Lynn, there's no room for this. There's no room in the curriculum for it anywhere except in the PhD program. I went, because it just doesn't fit. They just don't have the room. In my talk, I presented how you can teach, learn, and apply systems science all at the same time. It's actually a systems view of education. You don't need to have it in a classroom with the expert in the front of the room the same way we've done in the past. So I started writing this book for people I knew. The hardest chapter to write was the chapter on information. It's a moving target. First of all, I called information a systems process, the process of forming within from input from the outside. I probably read 100 sources. I probably spoke with 20 different experts on it to put the chapter together, and worked, with Zoom calls and meetings on it. And in the end, nobody defines it the way I define it, but if you read all the other definitions that I also include other definitions in the book, it ties them together. It gets to the heart of what they are. And I had so that was a very difficult chapter to write, but information then is literally forming us. I am forming you right now. You are forming me right now, literally forming my brain. And systems affect each other that way. And so if you give somebody misinformation, you're misforming them. So when they go out into the world, they're not well informed. They're not well formed. There's some problem out there. So it's an interesting, very functional way. Information now is considered more fundamental by many physicists than matter and energy. So it was difficult to write.
It was
It was a
difficult.
challenge.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just, applying that lens to sort of what we're seeing in the current social political climate, right? I mean, misinformation is everywhere, and part of the reason why we're kind of in this kind of really scary times. I mean, if I could just kind of insert some editorializing there, here. I
Yep.
mean, yep, yeah. So, yeah, I appreciate you mentioning that.
Well,
Um,
I think that citizen science adds is a helpful means to shake down and statements that are made, assumptions that are made about how things work. And you can go, actually, no, that's not complete, or you can say, no, it doesn't work that way. It gives you a really nice foundation for framing what you hear in the world. So it's a benefit. Mhm.
So, with writing this book and for, a general audience, Lynn, what have been some of the most surprising responses that you've received so far?
Oh, it's been really well received, you know. I mean, it's it's scary for people to, most people aren't interested in sitting down and reading. It's very factual, I mean, it's not like reading fiction. It does somewhat tell a story. I tried to somewhat tell a story, but I had to like list, here's a network, and what is a network? And have lists of things. When it was fun when my editor, Marie Tamel, was an editor for 10 years for Penguin Random House, a senior editor. She's lives in New York, and she read my first chapter and she took my book on. And then she got the rest of the chapters and she went, this is like a series of PowerPoints. This isn't, what is this? And I said, that's because this is a field guide. It's a field guide. It really is. Think birds, it's a field guide. It's so that you can walk away and identify these things where you are right now. And when she made that shift, she went, okay, all right, I get it now. I can do this. I think that was fun. That was, it took a shift. Um, I think one thing that was fun was I gave the book to the sustainability office up at the county, the mayor's office on sustainability, and indigenous sustainability is part of that office. And I gave them a copy of my book after a meeting, after a presentation. And I came back the next day for the next day's presentation. We had a First Nation chief speaking from Canada. And so I went to hear him speak. And afterwards I gave this office my book. And the next day he was speaking again the next day. So I came in the next day, and the next day they were hugging me. Oh my God, this is saying everything we need. This is like exactly what we need. Hug, hug, hug. I thought that was interesting. They saw it right away. Right away. Some people just go, yes. They just go, and they're the ones already thinking this worldview, and this feeds into it. It really helps them. Um, Other people will just go, this is, you know, they're not going to talk to me so much. They're not going to say much to me. Um, a couple of doctor friends of mine, um, real geeky, smart, medical doctor types, loved it, just loved it. So I get it. I either get, I get pretty much 5 stars from the people who love it. And then there are people who don't say much because they're not going to say to my face, it's too much for me, or it doesn't make sense to me, or something. But you can kind of tell the worldview of a person by their response to the book, how they're thinking. It's interesting where
Yeah.
they're at, you know.
Um,
That's interesting to me. Yeah.
I gave it a 5 stars.
I know, thank you. Thank you very much.
Because yeah, I mean, I appreciate it. I mean, just in you be speaking to you as well, and I also, of course, in reading the book, I really picked up so sort of this, the deep respect that you have for, for, of course, the natural world, even though you were talking about, science and theory, it really came through that you had a sort of a deep regard for how, the indigenous folks see the world and, walk in it. And so I really appreciated that. I actually felt seen, quote unquote,
Oh, yay.
in your text. And so, and I also appreciated having that language and that framework that you were presenting. So thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really to put, we have, like I said, it's already in our language now, feedback loops are accelerating feedback loops, or now you read it on the front page of the New York Times, I mean, it's people kind of have a feel for that now where people didn't 20 years ago. I mean, when I was talking, I was like, could have been from Mars or something. But I wasn't as able to express it as well either. Um, so I think it's it's interesting to see how the culture has moved along, because this is the science of this century. This is it's coming. It's emerging. There are a lot of people doing a lot of great work in the science of networks and the science of complexity science and applying all these things. I went to the science of consciousness meeting in last April and attended, and I hadn't been there for 10 years. And it had changed. And they have big plenary speakers who speak to everybody during the day. And then they have all the different individuals speaking in the different rooms at the end of the day. So everybody hears all the same big talks, which is really nice. And there's lots of conversation about those talks. But one thing that struck me that changed was a number of the old timer researchers started. I used to think this way, now I'm thinking this way. Back in the 80s and 90s, we did it this way. Now we're doing it this way. The first 6 speakers were, and I spoke about this in my little breakout session, spoke about oscillations, networks, feedback loops. Somebody else was talking. There are 6 different systems processes and one for each different talk. They had gone off in that direction, and they don't have a full view of a system science yet. They took courses, or they read up, or they got the tools for their particular way of working, and they're doing great work. But they don't have access to all the tools because we don't have that overview. It doesn't mean you can use all the tools all at one time, but you're not taking it in high school yet. It's not a basic science course yet. So everybody who's using it has to discover it out there in the world by reading up and through workshops or wherever. So it's an interesting thing. It's forming up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you, Lynn. And those are all the questions I have. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so. We covered a lot of
We
things.
did.
I
Yeah.
hope I hope people aren't daunted. I didn't put science in the title because I didn't want people to be daunted by science. By um, I wanted people to see that it's nature's patterns and that they're all familiar. If you don't recognize them right when you see the word, you'll know them by the first paragraph, as I'm describing them, because we're made up of them. We use them every day. They're all around us. Everything is made up of them. So I hope people will approach the book kind of openly and give it a shot, and not be afraid of system science or